Oh, with us now is Sajid Javid, the Conservative Financial Secretary to the Treasury. Also here, the Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Labour's Chris Leslie. £12 billion, you reckon, can be saved from the welfare benefit. Which benefits will be cut?
Good evening. We've set out today a strategy to deal with the economy and to make sure it continues to recover. And that means continuing to make some very hard decisions. That's what the Chancellor set out today. The hard work of the British people is paying off. We're not going to squander those efforts, and we're faced with a choice. Britain is faced with a choice. We can either go back to the bad old days of more borrowing, more spending and more debt, which is Labour's way, or we can go forward and continue to have a growing economy, which means dealing with the hard truths.
Right.
Now,
do you
specifically
remember what my question was?
absolutely. And dealing now specifically, I want to set the context, and I will, of course, come to your question. It's a very important question. We've got spending cuts this year, next year, which includes welfare cuts, and what the Chancellor set out today, that beyond the next election, there'll be a further 25 billion of cuts, 12 billion of which will be welfare cuts. The Chancellor has given some suggestions today about what kind of welfare cuts we're thinking of, but we're going to have to deal with a welfare budget because, as we've just seen in your piece just now, it's still the second largest item of government spending, and we're not able to bring the budget's books back into balance.
As you've just said, this is a very important question.
That's right.
Which benefits do you propose to cut?
Well, we set out today two benefits specifically. Yeah. We're going to look at housing benefit for under 25s. Right. We're going to look at people that live in council houses that earn more than 60 or 70,000
Let's look at housing benefit for the under 25s to start with. I'll come to you in a second, Chris Leslie, don't worry. Housing benefit for the under 25s. If you cut that, how much money will you save?
Well, it's not going to lead to the whole 12 billion, and that's not our strategy today.
No.
We set out a process today of the types of cuts we're thinking of. We're not going to write our next election manifesto right now.
Can you just give us a rough idea?
It depends on how you finally set out that policy, and we have not set out every detail of that particular policy. It's something we're looking at.
Just give me, I'm not even asking to the nearest 100 million, the nearest billion will do.
What I'm going to set out for you is that over total 12 billion of savings, that can be an important component of it, but I'm not suggesting for a second that it adds up to the 12 billion, nor is the Chancellor suggesting that. What we're saying is these are the kind of tough decisions we need to make.
It comes to nowhere near 12 billion. It's around somewhere under 2, isn't it?
It will probably, some of the estimates we've heard today from some of the economists are around 2 billion, but it depends on the final detail. But the important thing is we have begun a very important process which deals with confronting these hard truths.
And I wonder whether you've really thought this through properly. Let me show you this piece of tape, which is a young woman. She's 22 years old. She lives in West London. This is what it would mean for her. This is how she depends upon the benefit that you propose to cut. Let's hear it.
Growing up, it felt like I had to grow up fast. The disagreements with my mum and my brothers and sisters is because I told them that I was gay. Went upstairs to my room, all my stuff was packed up in boxes, and I went downstairs and I said to my mum, what are they doing? She was like, you don't live here. I stayed between friends of friends. You're constantly moving, you don't feel safe, you don't feel stable, and I just spoke to the council again and just finally it got through to them, and practically I got a place in Centrepoint. So it's about £170 per month just to live here, but housing benefit helps towards actually me having a roof over my head. So it's not a lifestyle choice for us. You need it, because if you don't have it, then you're homeless.
Right, so if you cut housing benefit for under 25-year-olds, there is no money to pay for the place in a hostel which a girl like that has.
Well, first of all, let me tell you. Well, first of all, there are many under 25-year-olds that work. They pay taxes, which make the money that helps pay these benefits.
Indeed, there are.
And many of them live with their parents or their friends.
No one disputes that.
Whereas people that are under 25 that are not working are currently entitled to housing benefit, as you've seen. What we need to do to make sure that people like this young lady and many others have a better standard of living is making sure we have a growing economy and the economy continues to grow. And we're only going to achieve that if we keep confronting the problems facing our country. We cannot go back to the bad old ways. We have to make tough decisions.
All right.
And if it's not
Let me ask you
welfare,
another specific
it's got
question.
to come from somewhere else, and those are equally tough decisions.
She's got to just hope for the benefits of a growing economy, has she? Let me ask you another specific question. You cut housing benefits for under 25-year-olds. Does that include those who have children?
We haven't set out the details of this policy, and nor were we going to set out the exact details today. What we're showing is that we are willing to deal with the hard truths that are facing our country. We will confront these tough decisions and make sure our economy continues to grow and the recovery is not put at risk.
Now, Chris Leslie, how many of these proposed benefit cuts, you probably will be no more specific than Mr. Javed has been now, but of the 12 billion which these guys are going to cut from the welfare budget after the next election, how much would Labour cut?
Well, you gave Sajid a moment to put these things in context, so I'm afraid I'm going to require the same little bit of explanation. He's come up with, they've dreamt up this figure of 25 billion for 4 years' time. My view is that a sensible government would look at the state of the economy and make decisions based on what the economy needs. The Conservatives, George Osborne, we know they're playing politics, and they plucked this 25 billion figure out of the air as part of a political game to somehow create dividing lines.
So you
My
think
worry
there
is
needs to be no cuts?
no, of course there are going to, and we've gone further, to be fair, Jeremy, than any other opposition by saying we would not borrow further in 2015-16, the only year they've done this spending review for day-to-day spending. But the key thing is this: yes, we'll have to have cuts, but they have to be fair. And they have to also support growth in the economy, and that's going to be the dividing line between the parties.
The specific example of the young woman we saw there, you would not cut the benefits of someone like that.
It's a very good question. The notion of housing benefit under 25s, what about people leaving care, for example? You've mentioned the case...
I'm asking you what you would do about it.
Well, I think what we need to do is for the housing benefit bill, it's gone up considerably and the welfare costs have risen because people's earnings have fallen. There's a lot of people in work who get housing benefit, and that bill has gone up. If we dealt with the cost of living crisis, we could reduce the housing benefit.
Can you make a promise to that woman and others in her position that you would not make these cuts?
I don't think it would be fair to hit her even further than she's already suffering because of the cost of living crisis.
So you can make her a promise, can you?
Look, it's the difference in political values. I happen to think that in a society you've got to stand up for those who are vulnerable.
You're making a pledge now, are you?
We wouldn't do the bedroom tax. You look at the list of other
bedroom tax.
No. These are examples of fairness versus unfairness. We also wouldn't give a tax cut to the richest £150,000 earners, which Sajid decided to do in April, cutting it from 50p to 45p at a time when people can't get food, on their table. The food bank queues. Think about people struggling to heat their homes. Sajid, you have a very unfair society out there, made more unfair because of your uncaring approach to managing the economy and the cost of living crisis, which is getting worse, not better.
So what we've heard from Chris is exactly what I said, an inability to confront the hard truths facing our country.
But you're borrowing more than ever before.
More borrowing and more debt.
The reason your borrowing has gone up is because you've neglected growth.
And
Sajid, you don't get it.
Chris, you were asked about housing benefit. The only policy that your party currently has on housing benefit that you have committed, you will include in your next manifesto, is to actually increase it to make sure people have more rooms than they actually need in their homes.
Do you understand the point?
That is the only policy.
Do you understand the point I was making about people who, when their earnings fall, of course the housing benefit bill rises. The cost of living has an effect on the welfare bill.
I would like to turn to our panel here, because there was a moment there when we really saw something quite acutely political that's going on, wasn't there? What did you think it was?
Chris is right. This is a dividing line speech, which you can like or not like. It's a dividing line speech about on the deficit. It's trying to move the agenda back from the cost of living issues that were being raised before Christmas to the agenda on the deficit, which is the big one, and it will face all the parties with difficult decisions. Ultimately, it will face Labour with difficult decisions about what to cut, because there are billions of pounds that can't be covered by tax rises unless you're assuming massive tax rises. And obviously, it'll mean the Conservative Party goes into the election with a difficult message as well.
Your adoring fans, of course, know who you are, but I forgot to introduce you all. Lord Finkelstein, John McTernan, former Labour bigwig, and Linda Jack from the Liberal Democrats. Now, when you see this marking out of terrain, how's it going to play, do you think, John?
I think what you've seen today was George Osborne going too far. He's a politician who is too clever by half. He could just have stuck the figure of £25 billion out there and said to Labour, what are you going to do? And watched Labour struggle with the question you asked Chris. Chris is being asked to give a Labour manifesto today when we're 16 months away from an election, but it would have been a good ploy. To then say £12 billion are going to come out of the welfare budget, to have no answers to the question, which areas do you mean? I'll tell you what areas he means. That budget is benefits to children, child benefit and tax credits for children, is benefits for disabled people, or it's housing benefit. £12 billion is £1,000
well, actually, most of it goes to old people.
They've excluded that already. They've said there's 110 billion you can't even touch. So you've got this small amount of money, and I do not believe that George Osborne is going to go into an election actually with the kind of cuts that you'd have to make £12 billion from welfare. Unelectable. That's what a party would be. Unelectable who took that money.
Isn't the purpose, though, of setting out the figure,
people?
I mean, isn't the purpose of setting out the figure looked at strategically that Labour will also have to answer the question of how it's going to respond to that sort of order of figure, because that is just taking the budget books from the OBR and reading out what the figure is. So Labour will also have to have some response to that.
See, the thing that intrigues me about the current situation is you have a coalition government which gives the government of the day a large working majority in Parliament, yet whenever a hard question comes up, they say, well, what would Labour do? Well, I'll tell you the answer to that is let Labour form a minority government, and then you'll see what Labour will do. You can't say, I'm the government, but then...
On this question of the coalition government, isn't it very bizarre indeed when the Deputy Prime Minister is saying the Chancellor of the Exchequer is talking rubbish?
Well, to be honest, it's a long time since I've said I agree with Nick, but today I have to say that I agree with Nick. And I think, you know, he's at last got back to what our core values are as Liberal Democrats when we say no one should be enslaved by poverty, ignorance or conformity. So the clip you just played, Sajid, I would have expected a different response to you, to be honest. That young woman, to live in those kind of conditions, I have an 18-year-old foster daughter who you are going to take her housing benefit away from her, are you? I mean, you are hitting the most vulnerable when they are most vulnerable, and you're doing no cost analysis. I never see any cost-benefit analysis of what you propose.
Ultimately, there's £25 billion. This is what the election is going to be about. And clearly, you're correct, both of you, that the Conservative Party's got to be very careful as an answer about fairness. And it does have to have an answer of what the point of doing it is, otherwise all people will see is cuts. And that is, I think, a very big electoral challenge for the Conservative Party. But for the Liberal Democrats and Labour, the figure remains £25 billion, which has to be filled.
Why does it remain?
Which has to be.
I'm sorry. Where did that figure come from?
Unless
you decide to put up a lot of taxes.
The Liberal Democrats are going to go into the election saying that the deficit totals they've agreed to, they don't agree to anymore.
There was a report last week from the BMJ about the cost of malnutrition. Children going into hospital with malnutrition. Now, if you look at the cost benefit, that's what I'm trying to say to you. You cannot just look at the cuts without looking at the consequences. If you start to look at how you make cuts that are sensible,
the Liberal Democrats agreed to deficit totals, and now the government.
Sorry, Nick Clegg and Danny Alexander agreed to deficit.
The Liberal Democrats have signed up to the 25 billion.
They may have done in government.
They have signed up to the 25 billion.
Wait until our conference makes a decision on our manifesto.
Well, you're not speaking for the Liberal Democrats.
No, I'm sorry. No, they're not either, because we don't have a decision that's come through our conference. We are democratic.
Well, I think let's put it this way. I think it'll be hard.
Government functioning well.
Let's just deal with this. I think it will be hard for the Liberal Democrats. We may have a disagreement on this, but I think it'd be hard for them to walk away from the figures they agreed to. Those figures imply 25 billion. Perhaps the Labour Party will have slightly easier deficit reduction terms. Chris has said correctly, we don't know those are going to be the exact figures, but we know it's going to be many billions of pounds. So the question will be for all the parties, I agree, and the Conservative Party will have to have a response. How are they going to fill that? Now, I'd love it if it was not a difficulty for anyone, but that's not really realistic.
See, Danny, I think the problem you've got, and you've articulated it well, the problem is ordinary people seeing this see a government that says they'll take £12 billion out of a specific set of benefits, but has a minister who cannot name a single benefit he'd reduce. It makes a political choice into a farce. If we're going to have hard decisions, let's have hard information.
There's something else